Hi, welcome. My name is Dawn Maddux. I am a nurse with the Heart Resource Center at Spartanburg Regional at the Church Street campus with the, in the Heart Center. My partner in crime, Carrie Stewart, is usually the host, but she is out currently. So this month we have Matt Leiden, and I will let him introduce himself, but he's here to do some fermenting recipes with us. And we're so glad that you're here. We will be, after this is over, we'll be sure to add this to our YouTube channel. So for those of you who missed it today, we're glad to see you on YouTube. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them in the Q&A. We won't have the chat open, but the Q&A will be, and I'll be checking that throughout the hour. So we're really glad you're here. Without further ado, Matt, I'll allow you to introduce yourself and jump in.
Great. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody out in colorful cooking at home land. My name is Matt Leiden. I'm the sports medicine manager for the healthcare system. I've been in that role for 17 years. So on a daily basis, I have no clue where I go. It could be anywhere in one of our 4 counties, Union, Cherokee, Spartanburg, and Greenville, checking up with school partnerships and kind of our orthopedic and musculoskeletal service lines across the community. So that's just a quick, boring background about me, but let's jump into our cooking demonstration for today. I grew up in a household. My father was a restaurant owner. I spent a lot of time in kitchens as a kid. And so I felt like I don't feel like I am a great cook, but I think what I did afford myself in that environment was just learning like knife skills or proper handling of foods. And then my mom grew up in Western Pennsylvania in a pretty like small town where they raised probably 85 to 90% of what they consumed at home. So as the youngest and the golden child and the baby of the family, I was stuck to mom's hip pocket through most of my life. And she was a great cook. And so I attribute a lot of my skill sets to her, and then some of the chefs that I got to hang out in the back pocket at my dad's restaurants as a kid. So today is all about fun with fermentation. And so again, I like to, my staple when I get into the kitchen is simplicity. I usually try to avoid things that are like overly complicated. One, because I think we have such delicious options and no reason to adulterate them any more than what they need. And so I'm going to review 3 recipes that I absolutely love. They're very similar. There's a couple of subtle differences between them with the fermentation process. Excellent. Just a quick background on the fermentation process. When you talk about your gut health, first and foremost, it is one of the best things that you can do for yourself as far as adding a prebiotic, probiotic regimen to your diet routine and making sure that you're setting up a really good microbiome or a great environment in your gut, and then also feeding the soldiers your microbiota. So you actually do those 2 things by adding fermented foods into your diet. So the fermented food stuff, it's very scientific, right? And so there's a process of like breaking down salts and the natural sugars in the foods to ferment. But there's a lot of art behind it because you're also going to have time and you're going to have different salinities and temperature and light. All those things are going to affect over time your ferment. And so what they do recommend is there is a sweet spot of fermenting your foods. So one of them is very, very small, like very slow, long drawn out process will take somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 days to 2 weeks to get to kind of a proper fermented zone. You can accelerate your ferment. I don't recommend doing it. I feel like every time I've tried to rush a fermentation process, it ended up being somewhat disastrous and didn't really have a great product and just ended up going back to the drawing board and starting over by throwing out my product. So, I'm going to jump in. The first thing that probably one of my favorite, most simplest things is just a homemade sauerkraut recipe, and it could not get any simpler, I promise. And so I've cleaned my head of cabbage. And so basically you start with kind of prepping your cabbage. I obviously want to remove the core in doing so. And then you can do this to, again, it's kind of your buyer's choice as far as how you like it. I actually like a thicker, coarse sauerkraut. So I try to chop my cabbage a little bit thicker than I would a little more thin. And so as I do this, it's not enormous strips, but I'm not doing it paper thin. I know people that also like that texture where they're going to want something that's a little bit finer. I like a coarse sauerkraut. I'm good with that. Cabbage too just seems to be one of those foods that probably ferments as good as anything else you're going to find on the scale. So thank you. Like, I got yelled at many times by Chef Dino in my dad's kitchen. It was an amazing guy.
So I just wanted to make a comment of how good his knife skills are, how he's using the claw with his non-dominant hand. So he's keeping his fingers out of the way of the blade and barely picked up the blade. Anyway, so we're big on cooking skills, knife skills.
I'm all about knife skills.
Yeah.
So I am like, we could come back and do a whole this whole session on proper knifing.
I think we actually have one that's just on knife skills.
Okay, so another big recommendation on that is you actually to try to soften and not make your cabbage so tough is you actually, and this is kind of one of these spiritual things with your food too, is actually really handling it. Disclaimer, I did wash my hands right before this demonstration started. So cleanliness, I like to clean and pre-prep all my vegetables, making sure that those are cleaned and in good shape and they look good, they smell good. Those are things that I try to usually audit before I kind of get this process going. So I said, you can just kind of wrestle your cabbage a little bit. It really does help soften up and start to break down some of those starches. So your fermentation process will get rolling better. And we're not trying to speed that up, but we are trying to put it in an optimum environment. Couple things before I kind of like jump to the next step. So again, I told you about this is a pretty simplistic fermentation regimen that I like to use. So it's a saline water. So everything is distilled water, very important. You don't want to have chlorinated water. That affects fermentation. And so chlorinated water will inhibit your fermentation process. So distilled water is your best. So I do have a gallon of distilled water handy.
And distilled is different from filtered, right? Because they have both.
Yeah, you basically completely deionize the water. So it is as neutral a water as you can get.
The folks out there like me, I would be the one to grab.
Like a spring water, you could use a spring water, but there's still going to be some level of chlorine in that. And so it's not completely diluted of that. So
cool.
Distilled is your friend. Yes, absolutely. You don't want to necessarily drink distilled water is not good to drink because there's zero flavor in it. And so people there is a flavor to water. Distilled is not a good drinking water, but for fermentation, it works fantastic. I have prepared. I prepped us 2 cups of a saline solution. The recipe calls for, and we're going to post the recipes, correct, on the site, so people do have access to those. Right?
Yes, I'll send those to all the attendees, and so we'll give those out to everybody after.
And so most recipes, when you talk about just the basic saline solution for your fermentation, will call for 1.25 teaspoons to 1.5 teaspoons per cup. And so I went a little heavier. I went a little bit more salinity in that. So basically I did a tablespoon equivalent of 3 teaspoons. Thank you. And 2 cups of water. And so, but what they do say too is your saline solution, you should be able to drink it and know that it's a little bit salty, but you can drink it. If you feel like you're like drinking something out of the ocean and it's so salty, you probably have overdone it. And so again, going back to the art of fermentation, a higher saline solution will slow your fermentation process down, which at times is good, but there is a fine line between, hey, you made this a little bit too salty, it's never going to ferment properly, and then it's going to be just so salty that it's not going to be palatable. And so the sweet spot is somewhere in that 1.25 to 1.5 teaspoons per cup of water. All right, so mason jars. So make sure that these are clean and fresh. I actually love to do my mason jars for this, and I do a dishwasher run to make sure that they're sterilized and very clean. So I literally just did these this morning. So they are fresh out of the dishwasher, very clean and ready to go. This is a quart. So I have quart wide mouth jars because, again, I'm putting a lot of product in the jars, and I like to do it by hand to start with. And so as I prep this too, the 4 ingredients in my sauerkraut: chopped cabbage, cloves of garlic. I've peeled some cloves of garlic. I've chopped a few of these in half so they are not whole. They were big garlic cloves. I'm going to use 3 or 4 of these, and I just kind of throw those in there for a little extra added flavor. Really popular for sauerkraut, not in my household though, is caraway. Like, a lot of people like caraway seed in theirs. I don't prefer the taste of caraway seed, so I don't love that with my sauerkraut. So I go sans the caraway seed. So cabbage, a little bit of garlic. All right, another pro tip with fermentation, and I'm going to contradict myself a little bit. So they say to use things like wooden spoons when you get to press your items inside your glass. They also say to use things not metal. I didn't bring it, but I actually have a nylon strainer at home. So instead of a metal strainer, I actually use a nylon strainer. And so again, they say that the metal will affect if you're actually straining product through your saline solution. You want to try and strain that with nylon and not a metal, or a plastic. Works okay too. You do want to press this into your jar, and actually get a pretty good pack. And so, like I said, the wood spoon is my friend on that. And if I usually am somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 to 3/4 of the height of my jar, then I feel like I'm in good shape for this. Okay, so other like handy tools for the fermenting process, and I brought 2 different examples. I actually have 3. So you can absolutely do this with a standard lid. Yep. Yep. And so if you can see just your standard mason jar lid, this one's fresh, unused. Like I said, just out of the package and clean. This will make your life a lot easier. And so a product like this is a ball. These things they're not super expensive. The spring loaded with the valve lid helps you to not have to burp your ferment. This honestly is my favorite tool. Is they actually say you can actually go out into your garden and find like a smooth rock, clean it up really good and use that. But it's basically just serving as a weight to make sure that my product stays in the jar when we flood this with our saline. And then again, this is a one-way valve. It is like pretty soft, easy, having a brain fart on this material. So basically, I replaced my normal mason jar lid with my rubberized lid. And like I said, you never have to burp these things because they have a one-way valve. So it will continually, as it releases gas, it will do that automatically. If you don't have these products, no worries. Like, a regular lid works fine. You will have to burp your ferment, and they recommend you do that on a daily basis. And literally all you have to do is go and open the jar. You'll hear it. It'll have a gas release. Seal it back down, and then let it store and keep on doing its fermenting thing. So for this demonstration, we're going to go ahead and use my stone with my silicone lid. Thank you. There's the word that I couldn't think of a second ago. This is literally just a weight. And so it's just serving as a mechanism to hold my cabbage and product down. I have my prepared saline, and you literally just want to cover and just get it over top of the weight. So you have at least a good inch of space in between the top of your jar and the top of your saline. And that will allow for that good gas exchange. Voila. And so, like I said, this will become magic in somewhere in about 10 to 14 days. Storage, very important. So they highly recommend about 65 degrees is like the ideal sweet spot. It is very hard to find 65 degrees in South Carolina houses in the middle of the summer, unless you're paying $500 a month in your power bill. I have a basement. I have an older home and has an old kind of almost like fruit cellar-ish type basement. It normally in the summertime will stay around 68, 70 degrees. That's good. You just don't want to be up over like 75 degrees. So again, your ferment will work better in a little colder environment. But again, it's kind of like that art of, hey, it was 60 degrees versus it was 70 degrees, and you'll see a difference. And they recommend you actually, once you get to about a week, you open your fermentation product and you actually start doing like small samples. And every day you just wait until you get it to your preference of tenderness and taste. And so that is fresh. This is a 1 week old product. So the exact same thing. Right there. Yep. Okay. So I'm not sure how well you can see this on screen. And so if you look, you can see your saline will start to become kind of cloudy and almost dirty looking. Yep. All right. And so the other problem with temperature and your saline mixture and solution, and why that's so important, is to also prevent molding. So these things will and can prevent mold. Now, when you do this thing will normally create what's called a comm yeast. And so it's like it's very white. It kind of almost can look like mold, but it's not. And actually some people eat comm yeast and they think that there's extra benefit. I prefer to spoon mine off and throw it away. But typically when I create sauerkraut, I'll get a layer of that comm yeast. And so when I eventually prepare this for eating, I'll take the lid off, I'll spoon off the that yeast, and then your next step is in the fridge and it's done. And so I'll have sauerkraut in my fridge. And then that's the beauty of this, is literally I can just do my 1 bite of fermentation product a day for my good gut health. This will stay good in a refrigerated environment for months. So literally they say anywhere from like 1 to 3 months, this is completely fine. And I promise I've had some that have lasted in my fridge and I've gone past 3 months and they've been completely fine. And I finished it and it was as delicious as the day that I started. And so fridge will kind of stop your fermentation process and it'll kind of keep it in that time. And so you want to store it at room temp, and then when you're ready to eat it, get it in the fridge and then tear it up. Fermented, beautiful homemade sauerkraut that could not be any simpler, ready and waiting to go. So I'm going to put those over here. I'm going to get my board cleaned up for 1 second. So you can do a little quick commercial break while I'm getting rid of my cabbage. No, I'll be okay. I'm just going to scrape this into the sink here. Because everything was clean, and honestly, the next step is pretty much prepared. So that's all I wanted to do was, yes. All right, so on to recipe number 2. The next one is, and honestly, I think, I always say like, man, I love my sauerkraut the best. But then I make my beet kvass, and I'm like, man, I love my beet kvass. And so I probably at the end of the day equally love these 2 products as much as any other fermented things. And again, couldn't be any easier. So simple to make, and then it's just a matter of having patience to get it to a state where you enjoy the taste and the ferment's good. So with the beet kvass, obviously our base unit for this is beets. I had a hard time finding beets this time of year in the grocery stores. I don't know why. So I went to 3 different grocery stores. The first one I passed on because the beets looked horrible. Second one I went to, I settled. The third one I went to, I'm glad I bought them at the second one because the third one was bad. And so anyways, I have already cleaned and washed the beets. So with beets too, there's a long stem on these things. You can use those too in your cooking. You can clean those really well. You can add those into salads. You can saute those down. If you have some other greens or Swiss chard or thing like that, you can add some of that beetroot to it. and is delicious. So when you prep your beet for a beet kvass, you're just going to snip right at the top of the tip and the trunk of this thing. You can discard those things, or like I said, you can add those to salads or something different. I gave these a really good scrub, so these are done. You don't peel them, so you actually want the rest of the beet prepared for your actual kvass. And kvass, Don has a better base knowledge of this than I do, but it is basically like a tonic at the end of the day. And so you can literally use it just as a daily tonic. You can add it to salad dressings. You can kind of use it to replace vinegars in certain recipes, and so it's a pretty versatile product. And once your first beet process goes, and you actually have a base, it's kind of like having a sourdough starter. Like once you have your kvass starter, you can continue to use that, and usually you can get 2 or 3 batches of kvass out of one batch of beets. You'll notice a difference in like the strength. And so as you get to your second and third batches, you'll know it'll taste a little bit weaker compared to the first one, but excellent way to go ahead and utilize your beets over and over again. So,
and I will say that I used the recipe because Matt, you did this, 2 years ago, but we didn't have the recording of it. Yep. So we're very glad that he's back today to record with us again. But I've used your beet kvass ever since then. And I don't know that I have any more knowledge than you do. I think you probably way out knowledge me there, but I do the shots of the beet.
I do too. It's my favorite.
So good.
And I feel like I can tell a difference. I feel like the one thing I can really feel like is my beet kvass working for me as far as good circulation, good gut health.
Exposing yourself to some healthy bacteria and other nutrients in the beet kvass. I've not successfully done the sauerkraut yet, but like you said, it's an art form.
It is. I have probably ruined as many sauerkrauts as I've had really good. When they come out good, they're so good. And then when they come out, then sometimes just like, this isn't fermenting. It's like, it still tastes like raw cabbage. And so I've been through that process too.
But this one's my favorite because it's hard to mess up.
This one does not mess up. Like if you, it would be pretty hard to mess up a beet kvass. You would have to put it in like a hot environment or.
And before Matt was here with us the first time, I didn't know the word, but it's KVASS,
right.
kvass.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what language that is, but I should have looked that up. Or I did it one time and I've forgotten.
I did. I just looked at it. Actually, I looked at it last night and now I'm just like, phew.
And I'm sure there are multiple names for it in different languages. Anyway, but other people around, my husband's family is from outside of the U.S. and they were like, "Oh yeah, we know what that is," but it was, it's a totally different name.
Okay. So as I'm prepping my beets, like I said, I pre-clean these. Skins on. You can have a little bit of stray root and some of that skin. That's completely fine. That's not going to affect this. And these don't have to be perfect. And so basically the goal is you want somewhere in the neighborhood of a 1-inch size cube for your beets. And so I'm just kind of chopping away. It doesn't have to be symmetrical. I go crazy about stuff like that. I'm a little type A. It's a problem sometimes, but other pro tip is please don't ever wear white when you chop beets. I promise you'll get a red spot on your outfit and they will never, ever want to come out.
And it can stain your fingers for a minute too. So be sure to let whoever you live with know that you were up to cutting beets that day.
Probably semi-appropriate too. This is a funny story. So my aunt eats a lot of vegetables and she loves beets. And so this one time she was eating beets left and right. And I was at a festival with her. And she went to the restroom. She came back. She's like, I think I'm going to have to call my doctor. She's like, and so went to the bathroom and obviously found out that it was beets. Like she had like a bright red
stool.
Product.
It will color. It can be the same color coming out.
Yeah, so that was kind of a funny moment. It wasn't funny at the time, but it was really funny a couple of days later when she was like, "Oh my gosh, I've been eating beets. We're going out of style."
Which is very good to know so that people don't become alarmed. So we found out it's Northern Eastern European languages, kvass.
Yeah, like
sort of
Slovak. I would say, like, I think Slovak was one of those, or maybe Poland.
Lithuanian,
Yep.
Ukrainian, Russian.
Yeah.
Yeah, those Slavic languages for sure.
So for your 1 quart jar with a beet kvass, so I think they call for typically like roughly 12 ounces. I have too much beet here, so I literally could make probably 2 jars of this today. So I'm going to have my extra beets left over, which would be great because I can make 2 batches of this at once. Because I can always use this. This again will save in your fridge for a long, long time. Okay, so again, so where we get our art form with the beet kvass. So little subtlety difference on this one. So the cabbage, I had a pre-prepared saline solution. All right, with the beets, we're going to do this a little differently. We're going to add salt to our actual mixture of chopped beets. And so I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a teaspoon because I feel like we're not going to get as much liquid. And so not to have an overly amount of saline product. Thank you. I always like to start with that, and I completely missed the boat on that.
The question was, is there a special kind of salt that you have to use?
Yeah, that's a perfect question, and I apologize to the audience because I normally would start with that. So, yes, there is. You do not want to use any salt product that has iodine, and so like your regular table iodized salt is a no-no. So again, it inhibits the fermentation process. Iodine is bad. So I like using a sea salt. You can use like any of like the canning salts, the pickling salts, like any of those typically are without iodine. And so one of those 3. So apologize for that. I usually would start off with that. Here's the beauty of beet kvass too, and this is kind of like with your oils or your vinegars, is your flavorings. And so again, this is your art form. I've prepared probably my favorite again is simplistic, my beets, and then I like to do a lemon ginger. I cleaned and I zested a lemon, and so the audience can kind of see and so we can see my zested lemon. And I like going a little heavy on my citrus, so I do about a tablespoon worth of my zested lemon. And then my ginger. And so microplane, my favorite tool that I zested the lemon, I'm also going to zest this ginger. And same thing, I'm probably looking to do about a tablespoon worth of fresh ginger. I'm just going to put this right on this board. Excellent. And that is it. A lot of orange. So like a lot of times, like a lot of like different citrus variations works for this. Or if you find if you have some fresh herbs in your garden, like by all means, like add some fresh herbs. Again, you would want to clean and chop those to actually get some of the expressed product into your actual ferment. This one has the salt in it, so I'm just going to go straight distilled water, straight on top of my pre-salted beets with their flavorings. Same thing, we just want to cover the product. And just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use it's a spring-loaded lid, right? And so it has kind of a press side that'll keep the product underwater for me. Push that down, squeeze that on. It's got a one-way valve, so it'll let air escape and burp, so I don't have to worry about this while it's kind of doing its thing down in my cellar. So literally, these will all move into my cellar over the next, like I said, week to 3 weeks. And I literally will say the kvass and the beets generally will go a little bit faster than the cabbage will. And I think it's just because of the amount of surface area with the beets versus the amount of surface area with the cabbage. Difference on that, and the beets are a lot sweeter. I have like my messy board, and so we're going to clean this up real quick. Perfect. Perfect. Actually, I sold those beets out. I probably shouldn't have sold them out. They weren't as bad. Once we actually cut into them, they actually were just fine. Do we have any questions out in the audience besides the salt question?
Not so far. If anybody does have any questions, you're welcome to post them in the Q&A. I've not checked the chat. I don't think the chat is open, but if you type them into the Q&A, I can see them from this end and happy to answer them.
I really want to eat this sauerkraut. I feel like this is going to be such a good piece of sauerkraut, and I feel like I'm not. Is that an end question?
So let's see. Do you still have to burp it once you store it in the fridge? So once you're done?
Yeah, like so as soon as your ferment is ready, and honestly, I'm just like, one is you eating it is going to take care of that process too. But literally, it completely takes the fermentation, and as soon as you get it into a chilled environment, it will just kind of like see it's not going to stop fermenting. It will stop, but it slows down dramatically, and so there's really not a need to do the burping. Yep, like you would at room temperature. So, all right. So we're going to do one more ingredient today. So these are my fermented pickles. And so they're not actually pickles. And so again, you can do a variety of vegetables. For today's recipe, I actually have some prepared cauliflower. I went with some like orange carrots. I went with some colored purple and yellow carrot. And then some red pepper. And so I've cleaned and split and I've de-seeded my pepper, but I'm just, again, just for demonstration purposes and some knifing skills. You don't want to you don't want to chop these things too fine. Again, you don't want to have so much surface area. It'll again accelerate your fermentation and probably make it too fast. So I normally like the standard, just like with the beets, somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 1-inch cube or a 1-inch chunk of vegetable. And so I'm going to throw some red peppers. So that was a whole pepper. This was about, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1/3 to 1/2 of a cauliflower. And again, you want to do like 1-inch chunks. I probably made these a little bit bigger. I might sometimes make those a little smaller. Carrots, same thing, cleaned. I did peel my carrots as well, so I didn't want to have any like excess dirt or products. So I eliminated all of those. Garlic. For this one, I actually like to, I smash a couple of heads of garlic. So I use the back of my knife for that. And then it also helps me, so I can do that with my skin on, but then I remove my garlic skins before I throw those in there. So I want to peel those. That will add some flavoring. This recipe calls for coriander seed, and for whatever, I had the hardest time finding coriander seed. But the coolest thing, I was at Fresh Market and I saw where I was hoping to see a coriander seed. I saw a pickling spice, so I'm like, well, I've never tried it, and so this is going to be a new adventure for me in flavoring this thing. But the nice thing about this was this actually has coriander seed in it, but it also has it has cinnamon, it has dill, it has black pepper, it has bay leaf, it has some red pepper and clove. So I feel like it's going to be a really nice mixture for my fermented pickle recipe. I'm actually pretty excited about it. I also like to throw a bay leaf. I think one bay leaf is always nice with the pickles. With the pickles, I get a little bit more courageous with adding spice and flavor to them, just because you can. I'm going to go about, I want about a 1/2 teaspoon of my pickling spices. So I'm going to throw those right in. And then I'm also going to throw a little bit more black pepper. I'm going to whole black pepper seeds. Same thing. We're going to do about 1/2 teaspoon of whole black pepper seeds. Yum. I think this is going to be so delicious. And so, okay, for pickling. So again, three subtle differences. So cabbage in my coleslaw or my sauerkraut, 1.5 teaspoons per quart of water. For the beet kvass, we actually throw the salt in and then distilled water on top. And so we add that in. Same thing, I usually stick to about 1 teaspoon to 1.25 teaspoons per quart. For the pickles, I go a little higher level salinity than what's normally called. I pre-mix this because you also, when you do your salts inside your distilled water, if you're pre-mixing, you want to make sure that your solution is well done. I did this while I was prepping for today's show. So I had about 30 minutes ago, I put the salt in this to make sure that it was fully diluted. So this is a quart of extremely salty water. So this quart has actually 3 tablespoons. So I went a little heavy. So probably in our standard of, I said that wrong a minute ago. Instead of going about 1.5 teaspoons per cup, this is probably closer to almost 2 teaspoons per cup of salt. And so those all listed in the recipe too. So you guys will have that as a resource. So apologize because I'll start talking fast. Yep. So this should be just about there. I'm going to use, again, my spring-loaded like helper on this one because it will. And I could always use my wooden spoon to kind of compress. It's nice to kind of compress some of your product together too. Make sure that it's completely submerged. Under my saline. Oh, I can't wait. This pickling spice smells delicious, and this looks like it's going to be fantastic. Same thing. My my wife and I will see this in the fridge once this gets to like a right ferment. And I mean, every day we'll grab this thing and just grab a chunk of carrot or a cauliflower or a pepper and something and just kind of chew on it like a pickle. Add that as a little side accompaniment to a sandwich, along with salads. There's so much you can do with it. So, and then same rule of thumb, I usually give my pickles a little, like in general, the beets are going to happen for me in about a week. What I didn't show, and so what you don't see with this is when your beet kvass is fermented and ready, you want to strain your beets out of this. And so, like I said before, what you're going to do is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 14 days, I'm going to pull this out of my basement. I'm going to get my nylon strainer. I'm going to strain the liquid into a separate mason jar. And then I'm going to reuse these beets and I'm going to make another batch of beet kvass, and it's going to go back down into the basement to ferment. My liquid that I just poured off is going to go into my fridge, and literally I take a shot of it a day. I add it as like a vinegar to a salad. I use it for so much different things. I love having it in my fridge. And so you will strain that off. Nylon strainer. Just remember, like, try to avoid a metal strainer. So a plastic or a nylon strainer, so you don't affect your ferment. And then the pickles, I normally let these guys go a little bit longer. So probably in order of fermenting time would go like that. So these happen fastest. My sauerkraut probably happens second fastest. I let my pickles ferment in 1, 2. That's a texture thing for me because I want them just to get a little bit soft. So that takes a little bit more time in the ferment.
So does it so that's where the art form comes in, right? So it's kind of up to, is there a minimum amount of time that you should pickle something?
Anything you read, everything that I've ever seen, I've never seen anything faster than a week.
Okay.
That's a great question because there's things to accelerate fermentation processes. And so one of the things they advise like that is you can add yeast. And so like adding yeast to any one of these will help accelerate your fermentation process. Again, I think unless you're like in a perfect environment, I think accelerating your ferment sometimes is almost a discredit to the quality of your product at the end of the day. I think at the end of the day, you're kind of flirting with, I'm going to ruin this batch by trying to ferment it too fast.
Yeah. And so it's okay to do a big jar like that because I noticed the is that double?
This is a half gallon jar. And so I liked the pickles go in a half gallon one
you got more of it.
Big chunks, you know, and there's a lot of it there. So
but would you do it at the same time with a smaller jar, like about a week It would be about the same
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
Okay.
Doesn't affect that ferment time. Honestly, I probably won't touch this for 14 days. And then at 14 days, I'll try it. And if I still don't feel like it's right, sometimes I've had these take 3 weeks.
Okay.
That's probably about the peak amount of time that I've ever had to wait for something to properly ferment for me is about 3 weeks. The quickest I've ever done is 1 week.
Gotcha.
So anywhere in that, like that's 2 weeks is a long time of experimentation of figuring out which one ferments right at the right time and tastes the best. And so
very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So hope everybody enjoyed. Very simple, like play with the fermentation stuff. There's so much you can do. There's so much spice. There's so much different flavors you can add. Go to town with your gardens. I have an herb garden, so I like to mess with different things in my herb garden, which is always a lot of fun.
And there's lots of books out there on fermenting, and we'll send out these recipes again.